Hey folks, this is Kalani. The dev team just announced some huge buffs and nerfs a few days before patch 11.1 goes live, and there are some major adjustments in here. Quite a lot of classes and specs are getting last minute buffs, but there are a handful of specs that are getting nerfed quite badly, which really won't feel great with it being so close to the patch's release date. There are also some large updates to various professions, special items and effects which could shake up your best in slot list in Season 2. There's another currency that will be getting reset with the new season, and there's also a new promo over on Twitch. So there's a lot to talk about in this week's WoW news video. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with the last minute class buffs and nerfs that came through towards the end of this week. These should be the last changes before the patch goes live on Tuesday, and there are some significant updates in here which could tip the balance one way or another for your class or specialization. Both Death Knight DPS specs will be getting a 5% damage boost across the board, so I guess all of the buffs up until this point still weren't enough for the Death Knights, so that 5% should hopefully get them to a good place as we head into patch 11.1 and Season 2. You're going to see quite a lot of these general aura changes instead of more targeted balanced tuning for specific abilities or talents this week. Now Druids got a handful of buffs at the very last minute as well, including some for Feral. Melee auto-attack damage will be increased by 25%, which is pretty huge considering melee attacks usually make up a good portion of any melee DPS's overall damage profile. Adaptive Swarm will also see a 25% damage buff to help keep that one competitive, and then the new 2-set bonus for patch 11.1 was buffed up by 40%. The Wildstalker hero talent tree will also see a 20% bonus to bursting growth damage, so it's all good news for the Feral Druids this week. Guardian Druids are getting even more buffs on top of the huge bonuses that they've gotten in previous weeks. They'll be getting another 5% increase to all of their damage, so I guess the 20% buff from last week just wasn't enough. Moonfire will also see a 20% buff, and then for Elun's Chosen, Fury of Elun damage has been increased by 80%, so Guardian could be doing a good chunk more damage next week. The Evokers are up next, and Augmentation is looking to be in a bit of a dire spot. Shifting Sand's versatility effectiveness has been reduced by 20%, Breath of Eons now accumulates 8% of damage taken down from 10%, so that's a pretty huge nerf to the overall damage output of Breath of Eons, but then Close's Clutchmates was also nuked down to just a 10% effectiveness bonus outside of raid, down from 25%, so that's less than half as powerful as it used to be. With all of the other changes coming to Augmentation in this patch, I think this may be the first time that Augmentation could end up on the back burner in favour of other classes, especially in Mythic Plus dungeons. We'll have to wait to see how the larger changes settle down in the new season, but it's not looking good for Augmentation right now. Thankfully, Devastation won't follow suit. They're going to see a 6% damage increase across the board for all of their abilities, although their 2-set bonus was changed to no longer grant Essence Burst from Shattering Star procs. Hunters made the list this week as well, but it's not good news for the Beast Mastery Hunters. They're going to see an 8% damage nerf across the board, which is definitely going to hurt. Let's be honest, anytime there's an across the board nerf, it's never going to feel good, but I guess Beast Mastery was doing just a bit too much damage on the PTR, so they've been reined in at the last second. On the other hand, Marksmanship is going to see a 6% damage buff for all of their abilities, and the Precise Shots focus cost reduction was increased to 40% up from 30%. Marksmanship has a lot of changes going into this patch, and from what I've played, the overall rework is really fun to play, so getting a damage boost on top of that is going to feel good for sure. Paladins have a quick buff for Holy. They'll be getting a 4% increase to all of their healing done. That's it for the Paladins, no last minute ret or prop buffs, but honestly those specs are looking pretty good as we head into patch 11.1 anyway. Any extra buffs would have been very surprising indeed. Now, priests have some pretty significant changes this week as well. To start with, the Voidweaver talent tree is being updated to reduce its effectiveness somewhat for discipline, so there are quite a few nerfs to Void Wraith specifically, but to make sure that Shadow isn't left behind here, they're going to see a 13% damage buff for all of their abilities. We usually don't see double-digit across-the-board nerfs or buffs. The tank buffs from last week were kind of an outlier there, but Shadow is coasting into the patch launch with a 13% buff. Now there have been a couple of nerfs to the new 2-set bonus in patch 11.1, so that's not ideal, but the Void Weaver hero talent tree will see a few buffs for Shadow as well. Void Blast damage has been increased by 25%, Inner Quietus was buffed up to a 35% bonus, and Collapsing Void damage was increased by 15% as well. And that's all on top of that 13% buff. I'll be very interested to see how Shadow does in these first few weeks with all of these buffs in play. Moving on, we come to the rogues, and no, you didn't hear that wrong, rogues actually have some changes. It took until just before the patch goes live, but hey, it's better late than never, right? Rupture damage has been increased by 6% for every spec by the looks of things. For Trickster, Unseen Blade damage has been increased by 15%, Surprising Strike critical damage bonus has been increased to 50% up from 25%, and 1000 Cuts chance to reset Unseen Blade has been increased slightly. For Assassination, Crimson Tempest damage has been increased by 6%, Arterial Precision now causes Shiv to strike 8 targets up from 5, so a bit more AoE potential for Assassination there, and then Sudden Demise now increases bleed damage by 15% up from 10%. For Outlaw, Precise Cuts now increases Blade Flurry damage by 5% per missing target up from 4%, and Nimble Flurry now increases Blade Flurry damage by 25% up from 20%. And then Subtlety has some changes too, including a 10% damage increase across the board for all of their abilities. The 2-set bonus for patch 11.1 was nerfed slightly, and the 4-set bonus was nerfed by quite a bit more, but then Nimble Flurry was buffed up for subs. That'll be up to 60% of listed ability damage, up from 50%. I'm sure the rogues out there would prefer some more impactful changes, perhaps to talents and rotational complexity, but at least you got some damage bonuses to work with until the larger changes make it through the pipeline. Next up, we have the Shamans, and for once they only have one line of updates in their patch notes. They're not taking over the whole thing like they usually do. Resto Shamans will be seeing a 4% increase to all of their healing. Not all too exciting, but it's better than a nerf, I suppose. Another somewhat ignored spec up until now has been Affliction Warlocks, so it's no surprise they joined the list this week as well. Summon Darkglare has been adjusted to provide a 45% damage bonus up from 25%, Focused Malignancy was buffed up to a 40% damage bonus up from 25%, and then Unstable Affliction damage has been increased by 30%, Shadow Bolt damage is up 20%, and Drain Soul damage is up 20% as well. So some huge damage buffs for Affliction's main abilities and cooldowns as we head into patch 11.1 and Season 2. And then last but not least we come to the Warriors, and it's not a good note to end on, I'm afraid. Both Arms and Fury are going to see a 5% damage reduction for all of their abilities. Both Arms and Fury have seen a lot of buffs over the last few weeks, so I guess they went a little too far and the dev team decided to rein them in just before the patch goes live. But that's all of the last minute class changes that were hotfixed into patch 11.1 right before release day. Some huge buffs and some pretty big nerfs for certain classes as well. I doubt we're going to see any further balanced tuning updates before the patch goes live, unless the dev team surprises us on Monday, but I would expect to see tuning happen in the first week of the patch, or at the very latest the first week of the new season. So don't worry too much if your class is in bad shape right now. Major outliers will always be brought up or down whenever needed when the new patch is underway. Now, there are a handful of other updates in patch 11.1 this week as well, including confirmation from the dev team that the Enchanted Crest process has been removed in patch 11.1. In our recent video that went over some of the smaller changes in patch 11.1, we talked about Enchanted Crests now being available straight from the vendor, and you don't have to actually get them enchanted by an enchanter anymore. A few folks were confused about this and thought that it was maybe just for the PTR and testing purposes, but the Enchanted Crest recipes were actually removed in previous PTR builds. You couldn't learn them as an enchanter, and now we have confirmation from the dev team that this is an intended change. In a blue post, they said to help simplify some of the crafting process, enchanted crests are no longer made by enchanters and are instead purchasable from enchanting supplies vendors or Cyanite outside of the Crafter's Enclave in Dornagal, so getting your crafted gear made or upgraded in Season 2 will be a bit easier thanks to that step being removed. Now you just need to trade your crests in for the enchanted crest, which can then immediately be used to increase the item level of your gear. Unfortunately, that does leave enchanters out in the cold a little bit, but hopefully this next round of changes can help them make a bit more gold with their actual enchants. Quite a few profession items and enchants have been buffed this week, which could shake things up as players start hunting for their best in slot items and effects. The siphoning stiletto from blacksmithing had its effect buffed slightly, various weapon enchants were buffed by up to 148%, which is kinda crazy, so your best weapon enchant may be different in the new patch and season. Oil of Deep Toxins was buffed up by 48%, and Oil of Belidar's Grace was buffed up by a whopping 235%. So that might actually be useful moving forward. Some engineering effects had their damage buffed, the captured Starlight damage absorption was buffed massively as well, and then the sanctified Torchbearer's grips from leatherworking had their damage increased by 48% too. Now with so many effects and enchants to choose from, I'm sure it's a real pain in the rear to try and balance this kind of thing, but with how large some of these buffs are, at least something should shift around in the new patch. So keep your eye on your class guides on websites like Wowhead to make sure you're using the recommended gear, consumables, and enchants when you start gearing up in Season 2. As we approach the launch of patch 11.1, there have been quite a lot of developer interviews popping up with interesting tidbits of info, developer insights, and some general Q&A. Most of it deals with how the dev team came to various conclusions and why updates and changes have been made, so I would encourage you to check them out if you're interested in that kind of thing, but there's one piece of information that hasn't been talked about anywhere else from what I can remember. We know that most currencies will be reset as we head into Season 2, things like crests and valor stones, but there was one currency which we didn't really know about, and that was the Undercoin currency. This is primarily obtained from delves and used to purchase delve rewards. We now know that Undercoins will be reset with the start of the new season, so if you want to use those to buy anything specific, you should get that done before the patch goes live just in case. The dev who did the interview did mention that most older Undercoin rewards should still be available, but they will cost resonance crystals instead in Season 2. So I would pop by the Delve vendors and just buy anything that takes your fancy, because you're going to lose any Undercoins you have anyway. It's better to spend them on some cool stuff instead of just letting them disappear. And then the last bit of news that we have for this week's video is that there's going to be a new Twitch drop to celebrate the launch of patch 11.1. You'll be able to pick up Tok the Clocker Spaniel pet by watching your favourite Twitch streams after the patch goes live. I'm not gonna lie, Tok the Clocker Spaniel gave me a good chuckle, and the flavor text saying he's the best watchdog you could ask for was the hardest I've rolled my eyes in a while, so this one is a must-have for sure. All you have to do is watch 4 hours of WoW streams between February 25th and March 25th, so you've got a whole month to squeeze in 4 hours of streams, which should be a piece of cake. All of these Twitch drops makes me wonder if I should fire the stream up again sometime, but that's all of the updates we have for this week, so that's it for this week's WoW news video. How do you feel about these class buffs and nerfs squeaking in just before the patch goes live? Are there any classes or specs that you feel still need a lot of attention? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.